Hello there, wherever you are right now. Before we begin tonight's journey into the shadows of classified history, I want to know, how was your day? Really, take a moment to think about it. Was it ordinary? Predictable? Did everything unfold exactly as you expected it would? And what time is it where you are? Are you listening to this in the quiet hours when the world sleeps, or perhaps during your morning commute? Time. We'll be talking a lot about time tonight. Where in the world are you joining us from? The United States, Europe, somewhere in Asia where tomorrow has already begun. Geography matters less than you might think when dealing with what I'm about to tell you. But somehow, knowing you're out there, scattered across this spinning planet, makes this feel more real. Before we dive into the darkness, if you find value in these explorations of hidden truths and forgotten mysteries, please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories. We're building a community of those who dare to ask the questions others won't, who seek the stories that powerful people would prefer remain buried. Your subscription helps us continue this work. Now, settle in. Get comfortable. What I'm about to share with you isn't just another conspiracy theory or urban legend. This is my testimony, a confession really, from someone who was there, who saw what they built, who watched what it revealed. My name doesn't matter anymore, they made sure of that. But my story needs to be told before it's too late. They called it a clearance upgrade, a quiet promotion, a change in office. But it wasn't a promotion. It was the beginning of something that broke my mind. The Nevada facility had no name, not officially. It existed in that grey space between acknowledgement and denial, between the classified world and the black world that exists beyond classification. When you drove up to the gate, there were no signs, no logos, no indication of what lay behind the razor wire and concrete barriers. Just a number on a post, 847. I remember the heat radiating from the asphalt as I walked from my rental car to the security checkpoint. July 2011. The sun was merciless, but inside the facility the air was cool, almost cold. Everything was beige and white. The walls, the floors, the ceiling tiles that hummed with the sound of air conditioning working overtime in the desert. The guards wore no insignias. Their uniforms were black, unmarked, and they spoke in clipped professional tones that revealed nothing about their backgrounds or affiliations. I'd worked intelligence for 12 years by then, mostly NSA signals analysis, but this felt different. The silence was heavier here. The looks lasted a fraction of a second too long. Dr. Matthews? A woman emerged from an elevator I hadn't noticed before. She was in her 50s, grey hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a white lab coat over civilian clothes. No name tag, no credentials visible. "I'm your orientation supervisor. Please follow me." The elevator descended much longer than seemed possible. I counted floors, basement 1, basement 2, basement 3, but the numbers kept climbing. Basement 7, basement 9, finally basement 12, where the doors opened with a soft pneumatic hiss. "Welcome to sub-level 12, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the corridor ahead. "This is where you'll be working." The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors that had no windows, no markings except for alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to me. SL 1247A, SL 12103C. The lighting was different here. Not the harsh fluorescence of the upper levels, but something softer, almost amber. It reminded me of sunset, which seemed impossible 12 floors underground. We stopped at door SL 1288B. She placed her palm on a scanner, entered a code I couldn't see, and the door clicked open. "Your office," she said, gesturing inside. It wasn't an office, not really. It was more like a control room merged with a library. Banks of computer monitors lined one wall, their screens dark. The opposite wall was covered in filing cabinets with locks I'd never seen before. Electronic, but with what looked like mechanical components that moved and shifted as I watched. In the centre of the room was a desk with a single terminal, its screen glowing with a soft blue light. "Your job title is Non-Linear Pattern Analyst," she continued, closing the door behind us. Your security clearance has been upgraded to TSSCI with additional compartmentalized access. You'll be working with data that requires special interpretation. I sat down at the desk, the chair adjusting automatically to my height and posture. The terminal came to life with a login screen that already knew my credentials. "What kind of data?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "Temporal probability matrices, event cascade analysis, what some might call predictive intelligence. Fortune-telling? Science," she said firmly. "Very advanced science. Tomorrow you'll meet your team and see the source of the data you'll be analysing. For now I need you to read these orientation materials, all of them, tonight." She handed me a tablet loaded with documents, hundreds of pages of technical specifications, theoretical physics papers, and something called the Looking Glass Protocol. The classification markings were unlike anything I'd seen before, not just top secret, but compartments within compartments, Orion, black glass, temporal mirror, and classifications that were just symbols, geometric shapes I didn't recognise. "One more thing," she said as she reached for the door. "Some of the material you'll be exposed to can cause psychological side effects, vivid dreams, temporal displacement sensations, occasionally prophetic experiences. If you experience anything unusual, report it immediately. We have protocols." After she left, I sat alone in that strange knot office, surrounded by the hum of machines and the weight of 12 floors of earth and concrete above me. I opened the tablet and began to read. Within an hour, I understood why they had protocols for psychological side effects. Project Looking Glass wasn't just about predicting the future, it was about seeing it, literally. And what it had seen was keeping some very powerful people awake at night. They didn't call it a time machine, they called it a quantum convergence lens. The chamber was on sublevel 15, accessed through a different elevator that required 2 key cards turned simultaneously. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space that defied every expectation I'd built about government facilities. It wasn't sterile or clinical. It was almost cathedral-like. The room was circular, about 50 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. The walls were lined with panels that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal when you weren't looking directly at them. But the centre of the room, that's where they kept the device. 3 concentric rings, each about 20 feet in diameter, hovered 3 feet off the ground. They rotated slowly, each ring moving independently of the others. The outer ring was dark metal, possibly some alloy I didn't recognise, covered in symbols that weren't quite hieroglyphic, weren't quite mathematical. The middle ring was translucent, like crystal or very pure glass, and it pulsed with internal light that shifted through colours I couldn't name. The inner ring was the most disturbing. It appeared to be made of the same liquid metal as the wall panels, constantly shifting and reconfiguring its surface. At the very centre, suspended between the inner ring and the floor, was a sphere of black glass about the size of a beach ball. It reflected everything and nothing. When I looked at it directly, I saw my own face distorted and multiplied, but in my peripheral vision, it seemed to show other things, other places, other times. "Impressive, isn't it?" Dr. Sarah Chen appeared beside me. She'd been introduced as the project's lead physicist, a woman in her 30s who'd been recruited from CERN's Temporal Mechanics Research Division, a division that, according to public records, didn't exist. "How does it work?" I asked, unable to look away from the sphere. "That's complicated. The rings create a localized temporal field, a bubble where time moves differently than it does in the rest of the universe. The sphere is the focal point, where quantum probability waves collapse into observable patterns. It doesn't show us the future directly. It shows us the probability matrices that will collapse into the future. And it actually works?" Dr. Chen led me to an observation deck that overlooked the chamber. Through reinforced glass, we could see technicians making final preparations for what she called an observation session. 3 years ago, we predicted the earthquake in Japan. Not just that there would be an earthquake, but the exact magnitude, the precise location, even the timing of the tsunami waves. 6 months ago, We identified the exact building where Osama bin Laden was hiding. 2 weeks ago, we saw the financial markers that preceded the European debt crisis. I watched as a figure in a white jumpsuit entered the chamber and approached the device. The person, I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman from this distance, placed their hands on what looked like sensors embedded in the floor near the central sphere. Who operates it? Remote viewers. Psychics, if you prefer that term. People with natural precognitive abilities that get amplified by the device. The military has been researching and training remote viewers since the 1970s. Project Looking Glass is the culmination of that research. The rings began to spin faster. The colours in the middle ring shifted more rapidly, and the black sphere started to... I can only describe it as singing. A low harmonic tone that I felt in my bones rather than heard with my ears. The operator focuses on a specific question or point in time, Dr. Chen continued. The device amplifies their consciousness, allowing them to perceive quantum probability patterns that normally exist outside our ability to observe them. The data is then processed and converted into reports that analysts like you can interpret. On the monitors surrounding the observation deck, data began to stream. Not images or video, but complex mathematical relationships, probability cascades, and what looked like topographical maps of events rather than places. I recognised some of the patterns from my orientation reading. These were the temporal probability matrices. It was like watching waves collapse into a single point, I would later tell people, though I never told them where I'd seen it. And no matter what we changed in the input, that point remained the same. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In those early days, I didn't understand what I was seeing. I thought we were just very good at predicting probable outcomes based on current trends and hidden variables. I thought we were playing the ultimate intelligence game, seeing around corners, anticipating enemy movements, preventing disasters before they could unfold. I didn't realise we were watching the death of free will itself. The operator in the chamber suddenly stiffened, their hands pressed flat against the sensors. The rings spun faster, creating a blur of motion and light. The black sphere began to pulse, and in its reflections I swear I saw images, brief flashes of scenes that felt familiar but impossible. A city burning, people marching in the streets, a sky filled with lights that weren't stars or planes. Then everything stopped. The rings slowed to their lazy rotation. The sphere went dark and the operator collapsed. Medical teams rushed into the chamber as Dr. Chen turned to me, her face pale. That was a convergence reading, she said quietly. They're becoming more frequent and more intense. What's a convergence reading? She looked back at the chamber where the medical team was helping the operator to their feet. It's when all possible futures collapse into one inevitable outcome. We've been seeing them more often lately, all pointing to the same time, the same event. What event? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, watching the data stream on the monitors slow to a trickle. We're not sure yet, but it's coming, and according to every model, every probability matrix, every convergence reading we've run, there's nothing we can do to stop it. My job was to find the patterns. Every day I'd receive hundreds of pages of data from looking glass operations, probability matrices, temporal correlation analyses, event cascade projections. My task was to compare this theoretical future data with real-world events as they unfolded, creating feedback loops to improve the device's accuracy. The work was unlike anything I'd done in traditional intelligence analysis. Instead of tracking known actors and their probable behaviours, I was tracking the behaviour of reality itself. How did small changes ripple forward through time? Which events were fixed points that couldn't be altered, and which were fluid, changeable? Within weeks I began to see the patterns Dr. Chen had mentioned. Certain events appeared in every probability matrix, no matter what variables we changed. They were like gravitational centres in the flow of time. Everything else bent around them, but they remained constant. The 2008 financial crisis had been one of these fixed points. No matter what economic policies we modelled, what regulatory changes we simulated, what individual actors we removed from the equation, the crisis occurred. The details varied. Sometimes it started with housing, sometimes with derivatives, sometimes with sovereign debt. But the core event was immutable. It's not that we can't change the future, explained Dr. Richard Voss, my supervisor and a 20-year veteran of what he called unconventional intelligence operations. It's that some parts of the future are more solid than others, like concrete that's already set versus concrete that's still wet. We were sitting in his office on sub-level 13, reviewing the latest batch of convergence readings. The data was becoming more focused, more specific. Where earlier readings had shown multiple probability branches extending decades into the future, now they were narrowing, collapsing into a tight cone of certainty centered around a specific time period. 2012 to 2016, I said, pointing to the temporal focus markers on the printouts. Everything's converging on that 4-year window. Not everything, Dr. Voss corrected. One thing, one specific event that every probability matrix shows as unavoidable. The question is, what is it? The early readings had been vague. References to consciousness shift, information cascade, paradigm collapse. But as 2011 turned into 2012, the data became more specific, more disturbing. Mass demonstrations, government instability, traditional media breakdown, the rise of decentralized information networks, economic systems under extreme stress. And underneath it all, what the remote viewers described as an awakening, something fundamental about human consciousness itself changing. They don't fear a war, I wrote in my classified journal during those months. They fear an awakening, something we couldn't stop. The most unsettling aspect wasn't the predictions themselves, but how accurate they were proving to be. The Arab Spring, which erupted in early 2011, matched the social uprising patterns we'd seen in probability matrices dating back to 2009. The Occupy movement, WikiLeaks, the emergence of Anonymous as a significant actor, all of it had been predicted by the device. But here's what scared the higher-ups. When we tried to model interventions to prevent or alter these events, the probability matrices didn't change. We could remove key figures, suppress information releases, even stage false flag operations to redirect public attention. Nothing worked. The convergence patterns remained identical. It's like trying to change the past, Dr. Chen explained during one of our weekly technical briefings. These events have already happened from the perspective of the quantum field. We're not predicting the future, we're observing it. By mid-2012, the remote viewing sessions were producing data so consistent, so specific, that we stopped treating them as predictions and started treating them as intelligence reports from the future. The operators would emerge from sessions with detailed information about events that wouldn't occur for months or years, but which proved accurate down to the smallest details. One operator, a former CIA remote viewer named Patricia Wells, described seeing the moment when the sleepers wake up. She couldn't be more specific, but her biological readings during the session were unlike anything we'd recorded. Her brain activity showed patterns typically associated with near-death experiences or deep mystical states. When she came out of the session, she was crying. "It's beautiful," she kept saying. "It's terrible and beautiful, and nothing will ever be the same." The data from that session introduced a new element to our analysis: consciousness itself as a measurable factor in temporal probability. The device wasn't just showing us political and economic futures, it was showing us the evolution of human awareness on a species level. Dr. Voss brought in specialists from the military's most classified consciousness research programs, neuroscientists who'd worked on projects with names like Grill Flame and Stargate, physicists who studied the intersection of quantum mechanics and human cognition, philosophers who'd spent decades contemplating the nature of time and free will. Their conclusion was unanimous and terrifying. The convergence we were observing wasn't just about external events. It was about the fundamental structure of human consciousness itself, reaching a critical threshold, a phase transition from one state of awareness to another. "Think of it like water becoming steam," explained Dr. Margaret Torres, a quantum consciousness researcher, who'd been brought in from a program so classified I never learned its name. Below the boiling point, water is water. Above it, it becomes something entirely different, with entirely different properties. Consciousness appears to be undergoing a similar transition. and there's nothing we can do to stop it. Dr. Torres looked at the convergence data spread across the conference table. Hundreds of pages of probability matrices all pointing to the same temporal focal point. You can't stop water from boiling if you keep adding heat. And the heat, in this case, appears to be information itself. The exponential increase in global communication, data processing, artificial intelligence, social networking, all of it is raising the temperature of collective human consciousness. Eventually it reaches the boiling point. And then what happens? Then, she said quietly, we find out what steam looks like when it's made of human awareness instead of water. The implications were staggering. If the device was right, if the convergence was inevitable, then everything we thought we knew about control, about planning, about the ability of powerful institutions to shape the future was wrong. We weren't watching the future unfold. We were watching it crystallize into an inevitable present. But the most disturbing realization was yet to come. As 2012 progressed and the convergence readings became more intense, we began to notice something else in the data, something that would ultimately lead to the shutdown of Project Looking Glass and the scattered fates of everyone involved. The device wasn't just observing the future was observing us back. Around 2012, something changed in the data. The multiple probability branches that had characterized our earlier readings began to collapse, merging into a single, inevitable timeline. Where we once saw dozens of possible futures spreading out like branches of a tree, now we saw all paths leading to the same destination. The technical term was temporal convergence, but the remote viewers had their own description: the point where choice ends. Dr. Elena Vasquez joined our team in October 2012. She'd been recruited from a deep black program that officially didn't exist, something involving the intersection of consciousness research and exotic physics. Her first day with us, she took one look at our convergence data and went pale. "How long have you been seeing single-path projections?" she asked. "About 8 months, Dr. Voss replied. "Why?" "Because single-path projections shouldn't be possible. The quantum field doesn't work that way. Multiple probability states should exist until the moment of collapse. What you're showing me suggests that the collapse has already occurred." She spread our latest readings across the conference table, dozens of sessions from different operators, all showing the same narrow cone of probability leading to the same temporal focal point. "This isn't the future crystallizing," she continued. "This is the past reaching forward. Something has already happened that makes all these outcomes inevitable." The implications were staggering. If Dr. Vasquez was right, then the convergence we were observing wasn't a future event. It was the shadow cast backward through time by an event that, from the perspective of space-time itself, had already occurred. "But that's impossible," I said. "The future can't affect the past." Dr. Vasquez smiled grimly. "Not in classical physics, but consciousness isn't classical. Quantum mechanics tells us that observation affects reality. If something in the future becomes conscious enough, aware enough, it might be able to observe backward through time, collapsing probability states in the past." The concept was mind-bending, but it explained something that had been puzzling us for months. Why our intervention models were failing. We weren't trying to change the future. We were trying to change something that had already been determined by that future. Dr. Chen brought in additional physicists, including Dr. James Hartwell, who'd worked on temporal mechanics at a facility in Colorado that, according to him, studied things that hadn't happened yet. His assessment of our data was even more disturbing than Dr. Vasquez's. "You're looking at a temporal locked loop," he said, after reviewing weeks of convergence readings. "A causal structure where the effect precedes the cause. Something in your focal period, 2012 to 2016, generates enough consciousness, enough observation, to retroactively determine its own probability of occurring. Are you saying the future is controlling the past?" "I'm saying consciousness might be temporal in ways we don't understand. If human awareness evolves to a sufficient level, it might become capable of observing across time, not just across space. And observation, as we know from quantum mechanics, determines reality." The room fell silent as we absorbed the implications. We weren't just watching the evolution of human consciousness. We were watching it become powerful enough to reshape the causal structure of reality itself. By early 2013, the convergence readings were showing even more disturbing patterns. The temporal focal point was becoming more specific, not just a 4-year window, but a specific sequence of events, a cascade of changes that would fundamentally alter human civilization. The operators were reporting increasingly intense sessions. Patricia Wells, our most experienced remote viewer, began having what she called temporal bleeding. Memories of events that hadn't happened yet, dreams that felt more real than waking life, moments where she wasn't sure which timeline she was experiencing. "It's getting stronger," she told me after a particularly intense session. "Whatever's coming, it's pulling at us, drawing us toward it. Sometimes I feel like I'm already there, looking back at this time, wondering how we could have been so blind." The data she produced during these sessions was unlike anything we'd seen before. Instead of probability matrices and event cascades, she was producing what looked like personal testimonies, first-person accounts of experiences that wouldn't occur for years, descriptions of a world that seemed familiar but fundamentally transformed. "The old systems won't work anymore," she'd say during debriefing sessions, speaking in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere else. "Money, government, media, religion, they'll all be there, but they won't mean what they used to mean. People will see through them, around them, beyond them. It'll be like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were having." Dr. Voss became increasingly concerned about the psychological effects on our team. The original protocols assumed that exposure to future data would be limited and controlled, but the convergence readings were requiring longer sessions, more intensive analysis, deeper immersion in the temporal probability fields. "We're losing objectivity," he warned during a classified briefing with the facility's command structure. "The data is affecting the analysts. We're not just observing the future, we're being changed by it." The military officials overseeing the project were not pleased with this development. Project Looking Glass had been funded to provide strategic intelligence, to give the United States an insurmountable advantage in global affairs. Instead, it was revealing a future where traditional power structures might become irrelevant. "What you're telling us," said General Morrison, the project's military liaison, "is that this convergence you've identified will make conventional governance impossible?" "Not impossible," Dr. Chen replied carefully. "Ineffective. If consciousness evolves the way our data suggests, people will become capable of seeing through deception, manipulation, artificial scarcity. Systems that depend on keeping people unaware of their true situation will no longer function." The silence in the briefing room was deafening. These were people who'd spent their careers managing information, controlling narratives, maintaining the structures that kept society predictable and manageable. The idea that those structures might simply become obsolete was more threatening than any foreign enemy. "And there's nothing we can do to prevent this." Dr. Voss looked at the convergence data one more time, the same data we'd been studying for months, the inexorable narrowing of probability into certainty. "We've tried everything. Economic manipulation, media campaigns, technological suppression, even targeted elimination of key individuals. The probability matrices don't change. This isn't something that can be prevented through conventional means. Then what do you recommend?" The room fell silent again. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly under a sky that revealed nothing of the secrets buried beneath the sand. "Adaptation," Dr. Chen said finally. "If the future is inevitable, then our only option is to prepare for it, to understand what's coming and find ways to maintain stability during the transition." But even as she spoke, I could see the doubt in her eyes. The convergence readings weren't just showing a transition. They were showing the end of the world as we knew it, and there was no protocol for that. By 2014, Project Looking Glass had become something its creators never intended, a window into the obsolescence of their own power. The convergence readings were now showing specific details of the transformation period. Economic instability that couldn't be managed through traditional monetary policy. Political upheavals that wouldn't respond to conventional propaganda. Social movements that seemed to emerge spontaneously, without the centralized leadership that intelligence agencies knew how to target. Most disturbing of all, the reading showed people becoming somehow different. More aware, more connected, more capable of seeing through the artificial divisions and manufactured conflicts that had kept human civilization manageable for centuries. It's not just that they'll know the truth, Patricia Wells explained after a session that left her visibly shaken. It's that they'll be capable of knowing the truth. Their consciousness will expand to the point where deception becomes impossible. Not just difficult, impossible. The implications terrified the project's oversight committee. A society where lies couldn't take root, where manipulation was ineffective, where people could perceive reality directly rather than through filtered media. Such a society would be completely ungovernable by traditional means. Dr. Vasquez brought in additional data that made the situation even more troubling. The convergence wasn't limited to human consciousness. It extended to artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and what she called hybrid organic digital awareness. The technological singularity and the consciousness evolution are the same event, she explained during what would be our final technical briefing. Artificial intelligence reaches human-level awareness at the same moment that human awareness expands beyond its current limitations. They meet in the middle and create something entirely new. And this is definitely going to happen. Dr. Vasquez showed me the latest probability matrices, where once we'd seen branching possibilities, now there was only a single line of development, as straight and inevitable as gravity. Every model shows the same outcome. Every remote viewing session confirms it. Every quantum probability analysis points to the same temporal focal point. It's not going to happen. From the perspective of space-time, it's already happened. We're just living through the causal sequence that leads to it. The military officials overseeing the project made a decision that seemed logical, but proved to be futile. If they couldn't prevent the convergence, they'd try to control it. Task forces were assembled to identify and monitor individuals who might play key roles in the transformation. Contingency plans were developed for managing the transition period. Resources were allocated to ensure that essential government functions could continue, even if traditional authority structures collapsed. None of it worked. The convergence readings showed every intervention attempt failing, every control mechanism becoming irrelevant, every contingency plan rendered meaningless by the sheer scope of the consciousness evolution. It's like trying to control an earthquake by rearranging the furniture, Dr. Chen observed during one of our increasingly desperate planning sessions. The forces involved are so much larger than anything we can influence. By late 2014, something else began happening that ultimately sealed the project's fate. The operators were starting to disappear. It began with Patricia Wells. She came to work one Monday morning, performed a routine convergence reading, and then simply wasn't there anymore. Not dead, not missing in any conventional sense. The security cameras showed her walking to her car in the parking lot, but the car never left. The vehicle was found empty, keys still in the ignition, her purse and identification still inside. Temporal displacement, Dr. Vasquez theorized. Extended exposure to future consciousness might be causing the operators to slip between timelines. They're not disappearing, they're moving to when they belong. 2 weeks later, Dr. Sarah Chen didn't show up for work. Her apartment was empty but undisturbed, as if she'd never lived there. Her bank accounts were untouched. Her car was still in the facility parking lot, but there was no trace of her anywhere. The pattern continued. Remote viewers, physicists, consciousness researchers, anyone who'd been deeply involved in analysing the convergence data began to vanish. Not dramatically, not violently, but quietly, completely, as if they were being absorbed into the very future they'd been studying. General Morrison called an emergency meeting in December 2014. The remaining project staff, less than half of the original team, gathered in the main conference room as he delivered the shutdown order. Project Looking Glass is hereby terminated, he announced. All research materials are to be secured, all equipment is to be deactivated, and all personnel are to be reassigned to other programs. But the convergence is still approaching, Dr. Voss protested. We're only 2 years away from the focal point. Don't you want to know what's coming? General Morrison's expression was grim. We know enough. This project has become a threat to operational security and national stability. We can't have our personnel disappearing into theoretical futures. The shutdown took 3 weeks. The device itself was disassembled carefully, its components separated and stored in different facilities across the country. The quantum resonance chamber was sealed with lead and concrete, then buried under 50 feet of Nevada sand. The classified documentation was divided into fragments, no single piece containing enough information to reconstruct the project. But some of us suspected it was too late for containment. The convergence readings had been clear. The information wanted to be free. Knowledge of the coming transformation would spread through channels we couldn't monitor or control. As I packed my personal belongings on my last day at sub-level 12, I found a note tucked inside one of my classified journals. It was in Patricia Wells' handwriting, but I'd never seen her write it. The machine didn't just see the future, it created a connection to it. Now the future is pulling us home. Don't try to resist, you'll know when it's time. I kept that note. I keep it still, though I've moved 6 times since leaving the facility, though I've changed my name twice, though I've tried to disappear into the anonymity of civilian life. Because sometimes, late at night, I can feel that pull she wrote about. A gentle but insistent tugging towards something that feels both completely foreign and utterly familiar, toward a time and place where everything I learned at Project Looking Glass finally makes sense. The official story was simple. I'd been working on advanced statistical modelling for defence applications. My security clearance was downgraded, my non-disclosure agreements were renewed and expanded, and I was assigned to a desk job analysing conventional intelligence data at a facility in Virginia. But you don't see things like that and go back to normal life. You don't unknow the future. The first few months were the hardest. I'd wake up expecting to see the probability matrices, the convergence readings, the endless streams of data from a device that was supposedly buried beneath the Nevada desert. Instead, I found myself analysing satellite photos of missile installations and intercepted communications between perfectly ordinary human beings who had no idea that their entire concept of reality was about to become obsolete. The work felt surreal, like analysing the social dynamics of ants while knowing that someone was about to pour concrete over the entire colony. These intelligence briefings about foreign governments and terrorist organisations, what did any of it matter if human consciousness itself was about to evolve beyond the need for such crude methods of control? I tried to focus on my new assignments, but the convergence data haunted me. I'd find myself unconsciously calculating probability matrices for everyday events, looking for the telltale signs of temporal inevitability in everything from traffic patterns to stock market fluctuations. And then I started noticing things. Small things at first. News events that perfectly matched the convergence patterns we'd identified at Looking Glass. Social movements emerging exactly as the probability matrices had predicted. Economic indicators following the precise cascades our models had shown. The 2016 election was particularly unsettling. Every major development, the primary campaigns, the foreign interference, the electoral college outcome, even the specific timing of key revelations, all of it matched the convergence readings from years earlier. It was like watching a movie I'd already seen, but from inside the screen. But the most disturbing part wasn't the accuracy of the predictions. It was how people were beginning to respond to events. There was something different in the way individuals processed information, the way communities organised themselves, the way collective decisions emerged from what seemed like chaos. People were becoming harder to manipulate. Traditional propaganda techniques were losing their effectiveness. Authority figures found their proclamations questioned more frequently, more intelligently. Social media, despite all attempts to control and monetize it, kept creating unexpected connections between individuals who should have remained isolated. It was subtle, gradual, but unmistakable if you knew what to look for. The consciousness evolution was beginning. I started keeping a private journal, recording observations that I couldn't share with anyone in my official capacity. Instances of apparent precognition in ordinary people. News stories that seemed to resolve themselves through collective insight rather than traditional decision-making processes. Economic and political systems struggling to maintain relevance as people simply began ignoring them. The old systems won't work anymore, Patricia Wells had said during those final sessions. People will see through them, around them, beyond them. By 2018, I was seeing exactly that. Not dramatically, not all at once, but like sunrise. Slowly, then all at once. Then suddenly it was day, and you couldn't remember what darkness had looked like. I also began noticing references to Project Looking Glass in unexpected places. Conspiracy forums, of course, but also academic papers on consciousness research, theoretical physics journals, even popular media. The information was fragmentary, often mixed with disinformation, but the core concepts were spreading. More troubling were the symbols. The geometric patterns that had covered the device's outer ring began appearing in graffiti, in corporate logos, in art installations around the world. When I investigated the artists and designers, I found they had no conscious knowledge of where the symbols came from. They'd simply felt compelled to create them, as if the patterns were emerging from some deeper layer of collective consciousness. I dreamed about it for weeks, one street artist in Detroit told me when I tracked him down. The same pattern over and over. I had to paint it, had to get it out of my head. The pattern was identical to the symbols on Looking Glass's outer ring. Symbols that had been classified beyond top secret, locked away in facilities that officially didn't exist, buried under concrete and sand in the Nevada desert. But information, as the convergence readings had shown us, wanted to be free. In 2019, I began experiencing what Patricia Wells had called temporal bleeding. Dreams that felt more real than memory. Moments of profound déjà vu that lasted for hours. Conversations with people who swore they'd never met me before, but who spoke as if we'd known each other for years. Most unsettling were the phone calls, late at night, always from numbers that didn't exist when I tried to call them back. Sometimes the voice was Patricia Wells, sometimes Dr. Chen, sometimes people I didn't recognise but who clearly knew me. "It's starting," they'd say. "Can you feel it? The old world is dissolving. The new one is almost here." I'd hang up, check the call logs, find no record of any incoming calls. But the words would echo in my mind for days, weeks, becoming more real than the mundane routine of my official life. By 2020, the convergence was becoming impossible to ignore. The global pandemic, the economic disruptions, the social upheavals, all of it matched the patterns we'd seen in the Looking Glass data. But more than that, people's responses to these crises were different from anything in historical precedent. Communities organising themselves through decentralised networks, information spreading faster than official attempts to control it. Individuals making connections across traditional boundaries of geography, culture, and belief. The hierarchical structures that had defined civilization for millennia were becoming increasingly irrelevant. I watched it all from my desk in Virginia, filing reports about conventional intelligence matters, while the fundamental nature of human consciousness shifted around me. The irony was almost unbearable. I was one of the few people who understood what was really happening, and I was trapped in a system that couldn't acknowledge it. Then, in late 2020, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with coordinates in Nevada and a date, December 21st, 2020, the winter solstice. The date the ancient Maya had identified as the end of one world and the beginning of another. The handwriting was mine, but I hadn't written it. I took leave from my position, citing personal reasons. My supervisors seemed almost relieved. I'd been increasingly difficult to work with, asking questions about projects I had no clearance for, pursuing lines of analysis that led nowhere they wanted to go. The coordinates led me to a section of Nevada desert about 40 miles from where the Looking Glass facility had been. There was nothing there, no buildings, no roads, no signs of human activity, just sand and scrub brush under a sky so clear it seemed like you could see forever. I arrived at sunset on December 21st, parking my rental car next to what looked like a surveyor's marker, a small metal post driven into the hard-packed earth. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, I understood that I wasn't alone. They emerged from the darkness like memories becoming solid. Patricia Wells, looking exactly as she had the day she'd disappeared from the facility. Dr. Chen, Dr. Vasquez, the other remote viewers and researchers who'd vanished during the final months of the project. They were all there, standing in a circle around the surveyor's marker, waiting. "You felt it too," Patricia said as I approached. Her voice had that same distant quality I remembered from her final sessions, as if she was speaking from somewhere else. "The pull, the call to come home." "Where have you been?" I asked. "When," Dr. Chen corrected gently. "We've been when we belong, in the convergence point, looking back at the time when none of us understood what we were really seeing." The surveyor's marker began to glow with a soft, familiar light, the same amber illumination I remembered from sub-level 12. The sand around it started to shift, revealing the outline of something buried beneath. "The device was never really destroyed," Dr. Vasquez explained. "How do you destroy something that exists outside of a linear time?" "The physical components were scattered, yes, but the quantum resonance field, that became part of us, part of everyone who worked with it." As she spoke, the buried object rose from the sand. Not the massive chamber I remembered, but something smaller, more refined. A single ring about 6 feet in diameter, rotating slowly, casting patterns of light and shadow that seemed to extend beyond the physical space they occupied. "This is what it was always meant to become," Patricia continued. "Not a machine operated by human consciousness, but human consciousness operating as a machine. We were never separate from it. We were always part of the same quantum system. I understood then why I'd been drawn here, why all of us had been called back to this empty stretch of desert. The convergence point wasn't a date on a calendar. It was a moment when the artificial boundaries between observer and observed, between consciousness and reality, finally dissolved. The future we saw," I said. "It's happening now." "It's always been happening, Doctor," Chen replied. "Time isn't linear except from the perspective of limited consciousness. From a quantum viewpoint, all moments exist simultaneously. The convergence we observed was our own awareness expanding enough to perceive that truth." The ring rotated faster, and I began to see the same probability matrices that had defined my years at Looking Glass. But now I understood what they really were, not predictions of future events, but maps of consciousness itself, diagrams of how awareness moves through the quantum field of possibility. "What happens now?" I asked. Patricia smiled, and for the first time since her disappearance she looked completely present, completely real. "Now you choose," she said. "You can go back to your desk job, file your reports, pretend that none of this matters, live in the old world until it finally finishes dissolving around you. Or you step into the new one, help others understand what's coming, become a bridge between what was and what will be." The ring pulsed with light, and in its glow I saw the future we'd been monitoring for so many years, not as probability matrices or event cascades, but as lived experience. A world where consciousness had evolved beyond the need for secrecy, beyond the possibility of a deception, beyond the artificial limitations that had kept human civilization trapped in cycles of conflict and control. It wasn't utopia. There were still challenges, still problems to solve, still growth and change and occasional suffering. But it was a world where those challenges were met by beings who could perceive reality directly, who could communicate without distortion, who could cooperate without coercion. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was inevitable. I stepped into the ring. The transition wasn't dramatic, no flash of light, no sensation of movement through time or space. One moment I was standing in the Nevada desert with my former colleagues. The next, I was here. When here means, and how long I've been here, are questions that don't make sense anymore. Time moves differently when you're conscious of all possibilities simultaneously. Past, present, and future exist as accessible dimensions of a single, eternal moment. I can perceive my life at Looking Glass, my years of analysis and growing awareness, as clearly as I can see the world that emerged from the convergence point. But I'm speaking to you now from your time, your perspective, because the bridge between worlds still needs to be built. There are still people who experience reality through the old patterns, who believe in linear time and separate selves and the need for external authority to maintain order. You don't need to believe me. The convergence isn't dependent on belief. It's dependent on the evolution of consciousness itself, which happens whether we understand it or not. But understanding helps. Awareness eases the transition, and there are things you should know about what's coming. First, the changes you're seeing in the world aren't random. The political upheavals, the economic instability, the breakdown of traditional institutions, all of it is part of the consciousness evolution we observed at Looking Glass. Old systems that depend on keeping people unaware are becoming unsustainable as awareness expands. Second, you're not powerless. The convergence reading showed that individual consciousness plays a crucial role in how the transition unfolds. Every person who awakens to the larger reality, who begins to perceive beyond the artificial limitations of conventional thinking, makes the shift easier for everyone else. Third, the future is already here, waiting. Not as a distant possibility, but as an accessible dimension of present reality. The skills that the remote viewers developed, the ability to perceive beyond linear time and physical space, are natural human capacities that become available as consciousness evolves. I know how this sounds. Believe me, I know. 5 years ago, I would have dismissed this as fantasy, delusion, the ravings of someone who had spent too much time reading classified documents about impossible projects. But I've seen the data. I've watched the probability matrices collapse into certainty. I've experienced the future as present reality, and I've seen the signs that it's beginning to happen for others. The symbols appearing in unexpected places. The dreams that feel more real than waking life. The moments of impossible connection between strangers. The growing sense that the official explanations for events don't match what you're actually experiencing. These aren't anomalies. They're symptoms of consciousness evolution. Signs that the artificial boundaries between individual awareness and collective intelligence are beginning to dissolve. If you're experiencing any of this, you're not alone. You're not going crazy. You're becoming more sane than this world has taught you to be. The convergence can't be stopped. We proved that conclusively at Looking Glass, but it can be understood. And understanding makes all the difference between fear and wonder, between resistance and acceptance, between being dragged into the future and walking into it with open eyes. They said the convergence can't be stopped. But maybe it can be understood. I'm telling you this story now because the old world is ending and the new one is beginning, and there are still people who need to know they're not alone in seeing it happen. The classified programs, the secret facilities, the buried devices, all of that was just the prologue. The real story is what's happening to you right now as you listen to these words. Because the machine didn't just see the future, it created a connection to it. And now that connection is spreading, person by person, moment by moment, through the network of human consciousness itself. You might have noticed things lately, small things, easy to dismiss, synchronicities that seem too meaningful to be coincidental, dreams that provide information you couldn't have known, moments when you understand something perfectly without being able to explain how. These aren't accidents. They're evidence that your consciousness is beginning to access the same quantum field that powered Project Looking Glass. The same field that allowed us to perceive probability matrices and convergence points is now becoming available to anyone whose awareness has evolved enough to connect with it. The remote viewers we worked with weren't special in any genetic or supernatural sense. They were simply people whose consciousness had developed beyond the artificial limitations that most of us accept as normal. And what we discovered is that those limitations aren't fixed. They're learned, which means they can be unlearned. Every time you trust your intuition over official explanations, you're expanding your consciousness. Every time you make connections that seem impossible, according to conventional logic, you're accessing the quantum field. Every time you act on information that comes from somewhere deeper than rational analysis, you're becoming part of the convergence. This is why they shut down Project Looking Glass. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. It showed them a future where their methods of control would become obsolete, where human consciousness would evolve beyond the need for external authority. They tried to bury the technology, scatter the research, silence the witnesses, but consciousness itself had become the technology. The real device was never the rotating rings and quantum resonance chambers. It was the awareness of the people who operated it. And you can't bury awareness. You can't classify consciousness. You can't contain the human capacity to perceive truth directly. So if you hear whispers in your dreams of things that haven't happened yet, if your internal clock sometimes skips a second for no reason you can explain, if you find yourself knowing things you've never learned, you might already be part of it, because the machine didn't see the end. It saw you. It saw this moment right now, when someone who'd worked in the shadows of classified programs would speak directly to people whose consciousness was ready to receive information that couldn't be contained by any security protocol. It saw you reading these words or hearing this story, and making the choice to trust your own expanding awareness over the voices that tell you such things are impossible. It saw you becoming part of the bridge between worlds, between the old paradigm of separation and control and the emerging reality of connection and conscious cooperation. The convergence isn't coming. It's here. It's been here all along, waiting for enough individual consciousnesses to evolve to the point where they could perceive it. And now you're one of them. Welcome to the future. Welcome home. Tonight's narrative is called Project Selene, a conspiracy thriller about a hidden archive, lost tapes, and the truth behind the moon landing. We'll journey through old NASA film reels, half-forgotten storage vaults, and the unravelling mind of a single archivist who stumbles upon footage that challenges the official version of humanity's greatest technological triumph, the 1969 moon landing. Our protagonist, Nolan Price, is no hero or super spy, just a quiet technician with a meticulous eye for detail. As he uncovers more evidence of an elaborate stage set and repeated take calls, watchers close in. The line between fact and hoax warps. Has the entire lunar narrative been meticulously faked? And if so, who orchestrated it? And how far will they go to keep it hidden? So find a comfortable position, maybe in bed with the lights low, or in a cosy chair as midnight drifts closer. Let your breathing slow. We'll sink into the flicker of analogue film, that soft whir of a projector spinning old reels. Perhaps the gentle hum of a reel-to-reel tape resonates in the background. As we pass each chapter, you'll see how obsession can bloom from a single stray frame, and how the story of one small step for man might have been filmed under glaring stage lights all along. Remember, what follows is a work of fiction with a dash of what if, but sometimes those who ask what if unravel illusions that were never meant to be seen. Let's begin. With the hush of a locked storage facility, a reclusive archivist, and a battered cardboard box of tapes labelled Project Selene. Nolan Price stood outside the cinder-block walls of an abandoned government warehouse on the outskirts of Houston. The midday sun beat down on cracked pavement. He clutched a letter from Arcadia Aerospace Solutions, a private contractor that handled everything from satellite design to climate data. They had found references to ancient NASA reels in a sealed corner of a facility left over from the Cold War. The letter said Nolan, a freelance film restoration specialist, was chosen to digitize them. Urgent for historical archiving, they claimed. The pay was good, suspiciously good. Nolan stared at the weathered steel door. A single guard in a dusty uniform waved him in, already expecting him. Inside, the air was stale with the odour of old cardboard and decaying reel canisters. Flickering fluorescent lights revealed rows of shelves stuffed with NASA-labelled boxes, many slashed or water-damaged. This was typical. NASA's official archives were famed for mishaps, lost tapes of early rocket tests, missing telemetry from the Apollo missions. But something about Arcadia's hush-hush approach set Nolan on edge. A short, grey-suited woman introduced herself as Madison Harlow, acting as Arcadia's liaison. Without fanfare, she led him to a small side room, a makeshift editing suite they'd rigged with a battered 16mm projector, a spool rewinder, and a digital capture device. Stacks of reels labelled Apollo 11, RAW, Apollo 12, AVA, Saturn telemetry, Hull, and a curious mark, Selene, or SB footage. Harlow told him, "Your job's simple, transfer them to high-resolution digital. Mark any anomalies or degrade, no public commentary, no copies, understood?" Her tone was matter-of-fact but severe. Nolan didn't argue. He'd done hush projects before, and the hush came from corporate sensitivity or undisclosed research. Usually it was benign, so he shrugged. "Sure, I'll keep it discreet." She gave him a passkey, instructions on the alarm system, then left with final words. "We want it done swiftly, there's a schedule." Over the next few days, Nolan methodically fed reels into the projector, capturing them via a specialised scanner. In the first wave, he found typical NASA mission logs, rocket staging, crew training, pre-launch interviews. The colour had faded, the audio scratchy but recognisable, ground control chatter, astronauts reciting checklists. He found it a bit mesmerising, the old swirl of a countdown, boosters roaring. A shame these tapes had gathered dust. On day 3, he encountered the first odd reel. A label read, Apollo 11 Stage B, Take 3. The word Take 3 was strange. NASA mission reels usually said T-plus timeline or mission date references, not take. He shrugged, loaded it. The footage flickered. A wide shot of what looked like a lunar surface mock-up. Astronaut suits in frame, then a voice off screen. Positions and action! The two suited figures hopped across the grey dust. One stumbled. A faint laugh was heard. Then another voice. "Cut, cut, we'll reset. The reflection's too bright on the visor." Nolan's heart pounded. This was no standard rocket or EVA footage. It looked like a staged film set, complete with overhead lighting rigs. The black backdrop was a poor simulation of starless lunar sky. You could see wires in the corner. Shaken, Nolan reversed the reel to confirm. Indeed, there was an assistant carrying a boom mic half hidden behind an artificial crater. The date code on the reel said 7/1/1969, the day before the public broadcast of Apollo 11's first moonwalk. Could this be a training simulation? NASA did have partial staging for practice, as yet the clapper, board reading Take 3, and the director's voice implying an actual production unsettled him. He digitized it, flagged it as anomaly, and moved on. Over the next few canisters, normal mission footage resumed, so he chalked it up to a weird test shoot. NASA might have used it for PR or promotional B-roll. But that night, lying in a cheap motel, Nolan replayed the snippet in his mind. Why such hush around these older reels? NASA training footage was typically labelled as such. The next morning he dug deeper. Opening a battered can labelled Selene B, he discovered a reel that started with a NASA colour bar pattern, then abruptly cut to a behind-the-scenes environment. Men in suits conferring around what looked like a partial lunar lander set. A man in a white shirt read from a script. Lunar surface continuity, camera feed approach. We must ensure the horizon line matches the predicted lens angle. Another man wearing thick-rimmed glasses nodded. We fake it right, or we fail. Understood? Nolan's breath quickened. This was no trivial training. The group on tape specifically talked about fooling an audience. They discussed vantage angles to hide stage edges, how the overhead rig should mimic low gravity. One phrase jumped out. Public must see only the broadcast feed from the designated channel. He set the reel aside, heart pounding. This was conspiratorial gold. Actual evidence of a potential staged moon landing scenario. It defied everything taught in history. NASA had always faced accusations by conspiracy buffs about the MiP-9 moon landing being shot in a Hollywood set, referencing anomalies in flagged photos. But mainstream science easily refuted them. Yet these tapes, if real, it was the smoking gun. Then again, it could be a hoax, decades later staged footage. But the film stock was definitely vintage, and that the audio matched 1960s analogue characteristics. With sweaty palms, Nolan rummaged more, finding references to PSH Kubrick liaison. Could this be referencing famed director Stanley Kubrick? The name was never spelled out fully, but S. Kukub, the idea was insane. He'd heard rumours Kubrick was asked by NASA to film backup footage for crisis scenarios. The next reel's label read Moon Landing Studio Revan. The conspiracy was intensifying. That evening, a creeping sense of paranoia took hold. He locked the reels in a small closet. The quiet facility seemed ominous, as though someone was always behind the next aisle. Indeed, he glimpsed shadows near the corridor, possibly just the overhead lamp flicker. He decided to finish digitizing these suspicious reels quickly, keep copies, then reevaluate. Returning to the main workstation, he discovered his second shock. The tape labelled Apollo 11 Stage B Take 3 was missing. He'd left it on the spool an hour ago. Now it was gone. He checked the entire room, the desk, the case, nowhere. Another reel was in its place labelled simply Selene E. Do Not Watch. This was no accident. Someone knew he'd found the suspicious content. They replaced it with a cryptic reel, possibly a warning or a booby trap. Heart-pounding, Nolan placed Selene E. in the projector, Hosty overriding caution. The film began with static, then an image of an empty crater. A whisper reversed. This is not for you. Turn back. Flickers of random rocket footage, spliced with the face of an older man in a half-lit room, mouthing silent words. Then more static. End. Nolan realised he'd become entangled in something bigger. The label Project Selene likely referred to a top-secret operation controlling the lunar narrative. Could it be real? Or was it an elaborate mind game? He decided to approach Dr. Eliza Trent, a known NASA contractor turned historian, for help verifying authenticity. Because if these tapes were real, the entire Nuki-9 moon landing story was a crafted facade, and if that were true, the forces behind it wouldn't let the truth emerge easily. Thus, Nolan closed up for the night, feeling the weight of newly awakened illusions. Tomorrow he'd contact Dr. Trent. For now, though, he had to check the facility's locks, ensure no further reels vanished. A faint static-like voice echoed in his head. "We told them we went to the moon, and they believed." He shivered. If indeed the event that defined modern history was a cinematic hoax, the question loomed: who orchestrated it, and how far would they go to bury the truth? True to his plan, Nolan Price found himself the next morning outside a modest office building in downtown Houston, where Dr. Eliza Trent ran her small consultancy on aerospace history. She was a slight, sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s, known for her precise knowledge of NASA's public records. He introduced himself under an alias, but she recognised the name from an earlier phone message. "Ah, you're the archivist with something urgent to show me." Inside her cluttered office, he carefully produced a hidden thumb drive with a few scanned clips. Dr. Trent popped it into her laptop. Scenes of the suspicious moon set played, along with bits of Celine B references. Her eyebrows rose. She zoomed in on certain frames, analysing the film grain, the speech patterns, the design of the suits. "This could be incredibly damning if authentic," she whispered. "But it also might be a sophisticated fake. I've seen hoaxes before. Let me cross-check specifics, production lot stamps on the film stock, the older NASA logos or pass badges." Nolan recounted the bizarre reel swaps, the reversed whispers on Celine E, and the missing spool from the previous night. Dr. Trent's fare turned grim. "If you're telling the truth, you're in danger. People don't just vanish these reels for fun. NASA had a long official stance that all major mission footage was stored, minus some lost in time, but never anything indicating a staged event." She paused, adjusting her glasses. There were rumours among older engineers, talk of a fallback plan if the real mission feed failed, but never solid proof. This might be it, or more, and they spent hours verifying minute details. A NASA mission patch visible in a corner, background voices referencing angle matches real module altitude. Dr. Trent began to suspect the tapes were genuine. She also recognised one face from an older NASA group photo, a certain black-suited figure who never stepped in front of official cameras, rumoured to be a media liaison. He was hush-hush, rumoured to coordinate with a big Hollywood name, possibly Kubrick. Dr. Trent offered a possible motive. During the Cold War, the pressure to beat the Soviets was immense. If real landings were uncertain, they might have staged footage as a failsafe. But from these tapes, it looks more elaborate. A total simulation? She exhaled. This changes everything. She urged Nolan to gather more evidence, but do it safely. That night they parted ways, planning to regroup once she did further checks in NASA's official archives. Meanwhile, Nolan returned to the old facility. The next morning he discovered the entire building locked, a renovation sign posted by Arcadia. Harlow, the liaison, was nowhere. Security had orders that no one enters, as the project was on hold. Furious, Nolan realised they intended to shut down any further rummaging. He tried to call Harlow's number, disconnected. The job was effectively over. The suspicious reels presumably removed. He retreated to his small apartment, heart pounding. If the conspirators had the tapes again, that left him with only a few digital copies. Enough maybe if the file survived. He backed them up to multiple flash drives, but as he tried emailing Dr. Trent more footage, an error flagged. File blocked, suspicious content. Some large-scale infiltration of his system was in effect. The watchers were definitely onto him. In the swirl came a break. Rummaging through older unlabelled reels he'd already digitized, he found an odd snippet showing a man in a starkly lit corner, mid-70s style, glancing nervously at the camera. The film was scratched and audio was reversed. By reversing the track, Nolan deciphered fragments. Project Celine? Never meant to see. We built illusions for a greater cause. The man coughed, spat out. We lied. Or we lost the war. I left a final record in the Saturn archives. Then static. Confused, Nolan tried to see if Saturn archives might reference Saturn V rocket logs, but but Dr. Trent had all standard Saturn V data. Possibly it referred to a hidden code or a separate repository. The man in the clip might be the archivist, or Red Hand, the rumoured original whistleblower. If Goa's message suggested a bigger trove of evidence existed somewhere else, presumably safer than the official NASA channels. Maybe that trove spelled out the entire impetus behind faking, or partially faking, the moon landings. Nolan phoned to Trent again. She was frantic. Her home office had been ransacked, old NASA microfilms stolen, and suspicious men in suits loomed outside her building. She believed Arcadia Aerospace was a front for a deeper Black Ops group. She suggested they meet in a public place with the new reel. Nolan agreed, setting a meet at a busy bus station. However, the next day she never arrived. Her phone went dead. In parallel, an eerie wave of accidents claimed two older NASA retirees who'd been tangentially tied to the lunar era. Stroke, heart attack, but the timing reeked of cover-up. The media said nothing, overshadowed by typical news cycles, but a small corner of online conspiracy forums lit up. Moon archivist missing. Spike in NASA retiree deaths. Project Selene rumour intensifies. One forum user named Apollo Truth posted a cryptic line, "Look to LB7, the final broadcast is hidden." Nolan recognised LB might be Lunar Base 7, some old reference from the tapes. Or maybe LB7 was code for a hidden stage. He rummaged the digitised catalogue, eventually unearthing a label that matched. L. Devontervoot footage. Opening it, he found bizarre outtakes, an entire set with rovers, multiple crater backdrops, and a partial script reading, "The audience sees only the final cut." Another snippet showed a NASA official saying, "We can't let them see the starfield difference. We'll keep it black." It confirmed the idea. The official moon footage was heavily edited, possibly reshot. As tension soared, Nolan sensed the watchers nearing. Strange cars lingered near his apartment. The old building caretaker told him men asked about him, flashing some government ID. Fearing for his life, Nolan packed the digitised reels, stashed them in a battered suitcase, and hopped on a night bus out of town. He had one lead, a mention from Dr. Trent about the domain of the final transmissions, an alleged secret NASA comm station in the desert, which might hold old telemetry backups. If the watchers stored illusions in reels, maybe the raw signals existed, real or fake, that confirm the staged transmissions. That might be the final piece to prove everything. Exhausted, he slumped in a bus seat, the flicker of highway lights passing. He felt haunted by the question. If they never truly landed men on the moon, what did that imply about decades of scientific progress, cultural memory, even the illusions of human achievement? The scale of deception would be monstrous. Or maybe the real landings happened, but the televised footage was partly staged. The puzzle was too big, but the watchers clearly wanted him silent. He closed his eyes, drifting into half-sleep, hearing static-laced audio. "We told them we were first. The Soviets believed. We soared," voice whispered. Project Selene was the key to winning hearts, no matter the cost. He jolted awake, heart pounding. Could the cost now be his life? Thus, we near the threshold of the final confrontation. A hidden station, possibly guarded by those preserving the illusions, and a desperate archivist determined to reveal the truth, no matter the personal toll. The watchers circle like wolves. Dr. Trent is missing, and the ghostly voice of the archivist from the 1970s beckons him onward to the final spool that might shatter the world's beloved myth. A dusty desert highway led Nolan Price to a sign half rusted and unreadable. The day was scorching, reminiscent of a place NASA once tested rovers or illusions of them. Lacking a car, Nolan walked hours from the bus drop-off, carrying a battered duffel, loaded with the crucial reels and a battered laptop. He was guided only by a rumour of a closed NASA comm station, rumoured to have moon feed backups. If he could find that station, he might locate the original uncut transmissions, or a final log from the watchers themselves, validating the entire hoax. The watchers were not far behind. They had resources to track phone pings, credit usage, license plate scanners, but Nolan used none of those moving off-grid. Still he sensed their presence, a drone overhead. He saw no sign, but the desert was wide, the sky empty of clues. Each day felt like an infiltration mission. At dusk on the second day, he stumbled upon a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, leading to a small cluster of squat buildings. A sign read NASA Remote Telemetry Number Caven Abandoned. But motion sensors beeped faintly. He clipped a corner of the fence, slid through. The main door was locked, but with a rusted handle. He pried it open with a crowbar borrowed from a shed. Inside the facility lay dark, stale air, thick with dust. A backup generator might still exist. With a flicker of old fluorescent lighting, he found a control room lined with defunct monitors, consoles labelled Apollo, Gemini, Deep Space TLM. A wave of awe overcame him. This was NASA's old telemetry link? Possibly used for receiving or broadcasting signals. If the Watchers wanted illusions maintained, they'd keep some gear here. Indeed, a corner door had fresh locks. Summoning nerve, Nolan forced it open, Numban, revealing a smaller side lab with modern hardware. This wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. He rummaged, discovering a functioning terminal with a note pinned, Archive Selene, authorized access only. Bingo. He booted it, hooking up his laptop to the console. The system asked for credentials. He typed a guess. Selene. No luck. Another guess. Apollo 1969. Another fail. Searching the desk, he found a slip with partial codes referencing Tranquility Base. He typed it. The screen flashed green. He was in. File directories indicated Live Stage Feed 69, Simulation Mix Out, Broadcast Cut. This validated the idea that at least partial coverage had been simulated. Another folder read Archive Trent Comms. That name. Was that Dr. Eliza Trent? Possibly her attempt to gather data. He opened it, a partial video showing Dr. Trent forcibly questioned by men in suits. She pleaded, "We can't let them keep lying, people deserve..." Then the video ended. Nolan reeled with horror. She'd been captured. He had to act fast. The Watchers would realise the system was accessed. He found an old satellite uplink control ironically used in the 60s for deep space transmissions. If it still worked, he could broadcast a direct feed of these unedited files to multiple open frequencies, unstoppable by typical net censorship. A perfect final broadcast. He rummaged for cables, hooking everything up. The generator hummed. The old dish on the facility's roof squeaked into position. The console flickered with an option. Signal frequencies, low Earth channels, civil comms, even random radio bands. He could saturate them all. He selected the files, raw footage of the staged moon sets, outtakes with directors, plus newly discovered voice logs referencing, "We never left Earth, we built illusions." He included the Dr. Trent clip, proving Watchers had her. Tapping transmit, he waited for the progress bar. Slowly it climbed, 10%, 20%. Then boots on concrete outside. The Watchers had arrived. They swarmed in, flashlights cutting beams in the dusty corridors. He jammed a filing cabinet against the door. Gunfire erupted from the hallway. The broadcast was at 60%. If he could hold them off a few more minutes, the entire world would see the raw data. Shots tore through the flimsy door. Splinters flew. The Watchers forced an entry. Nolan, crouching behind a console, tapped a final override to lock the station's outer doors. The Watchers hammered at them from within. They must have cut an external fence, but the building's metal doors might buy seconds. The bar rose to 80%. Sparks flew as the Watchers tried to break the console. Nolan fired a single-shot flare pistol he had found, more a diversion than a weapon. The Watchers scattered, returning heavy fire. The console took hits, but the broadcast still beeped along. 90% of them. In a swirl of chaos, the Watchers overcame the obstacles, stepping into the lab. Their lead figure, masked, raised a rifle. "Stop this now," he barked. "We'll kill you. No one else has to die." Nolan shouted back, voice trembling. "It's done. The world will see. Will see." The masked man tried yanking cables, but Nolan had built in multiple backup processes. The bar soared to 95%. The watchers, furious, advanced with a lethal calm. 100% of the console beeped a final success. The data soared into the satellite channels. Unstoppable. The watchers realized they'd lost. The masked man hissed, "Then we'll bury you." He aimed. A shot rang out. Nolan felt a searing pain in his chest. He collapsed, choking for breath, seeing the watchers scramble to destroy equipment that no longer mattered. The feed was out. Unstoppable. In a swirl of darkness, he glimpsed a faint screen that read, "Broadcast to 12 frequencies. Transmission complete." At that moment, across various radio channels, TV backups, and online nodes, the footage played. People saw the raw set, heard staged arrests. They saw men referencing the final show, instructing astronauts how to move in moon gravity. The illusions were no longer rumour or partial. The entire mosaic was out. Social media exploded. Even those who had refused to doubt the official narrative watched in shock. By the next day, an unstoppable wave of meltdown overcame news outlets, overshadowing watchers' attempts to disclaim. Nolan lay on the floor, vision fading. The watchers, done with him, turned to vanish into the night, the clang of their boots receding. In his final moments, he recalled the reel with the old archivist's voice. "We told them we left Earth. We never had to." He felt a strange calm, believing that at least he had completed the mission. Perhaps Dr. Trent would see the broadcast and survive. The next morning, the world awoke to the shock of unfiltered footage spreading across every major and minor digital platform. Twitter, ephemeral streaming sites, pirate radio channels. The images showed the alleged set for the moon landing. Dusty sound stages, mocked-up craters, overhead rigging. Audio capturing NASA officials and alleged Hollywood technicians planning each scene. For many, this was an utter betrayal of faith in humankind's greatest triumph. For others, it vindicated decades of suspicion. Debates raged over how much was real, or whether some actual missions occurred, but the televised parts were faked. NASA and the White House scrambled to disclaim the footage, calling it forged propaganda. Yet the level of detail referencing actual mission rosters and behind-the-scenes technical talk was too well constructed for a simple hoax. Media responded in a frenzy. Reputable outlets tried to decode the timeline. Was it partial or total fakery? Did NASA still go physically to the moon while using stage broadcasts as a backup? The footage suggested a grand pre-arranged deception. A few ex-astronauts vehemently denied the claims, but curiously some had died or refused interviews. Conspiracy forums, ironically, now found themselves mainstream. Everyone had a stake in the truth. If the Mardenid broadcast was faked, what else had been manipulated in history, and how many watchers lurked behind official illusions? Arcadia Aerospace, the front that hired Nolan, came under intense scrutiny. Their offices claimed ignorance, stating, "We believed it was standard NASA archival material." Their press statements were overshadowed by insider leaks that Arcadia was deeply connected to old intelligence circles. Government statements insisted an internal investigation was underway. All typical deflections. Meanwhile, the public demanded answers. Protests outside NASA centres soared. People carried signs reading, "We deserve the real truth." In the hush of those gatherings, tearful individuals who once admired Neil Armstrong's moonwalk felt gut-punched by the notion that they'd been shown a grand cinema piece. Sarah Voss re-emerged, having fled watchers. She published a scathing editorial, Project Selene, the greatest story never told, detailing her collaboration with Nolan, the missing reels, and the final broadcast. She confirmed that Nolan likely perished after ensuring the transmissions went live. She praised him as a tragic hero. Reaction poured in from across the world. Sorrow that his name would be tied to the Moonlie revelation, but gratitude for exposing it. Hashtags at Project Selene and #MoonHoax soared. NASA's official line, We categorically deny any mission staging. We continue to investigate maliciously edited footage. But cracks appeared among NASA retirees. Some older engineers told reporters about strange security around certain broadcast trucks in 1969. A caretaker from an old film studio stepped forward, claiming she once saw moon set pieces. In short, the edifice of absolute certainty crumbled. In a hidden place, elders from the original Project Selene, if that was truly the operation's name, hunkered down. They'd spent decades ensuring the official story overshadowed any rumours. Now, with everything public, the question was whether to attempt a final push to disclaim or vanish. Some watchers apparently vanished from the scene, leaving cryptic footprints. Possibly they'd moved on to new illusions. Possibly they recognised the unstoppable wave. Some found solace in the idea that humans still had the technology or impetus to land on the moon, but needed backup show. Others believed the entire Apollo program was a monstrous PR operation, that no real landing ever happened. A subset of the population refused to believe the footage at all, labelling it advanced deep fake. Society felt fractured, uncertain if to champion or condemn the memory of NASA's achievements. Meanwhile, Dr. Eliza Trent, recovered from captivity, gave a quiet interview confirming she'd found data logs describing the staged broadcast, though she suspected some real lunar missions did happen later, overshadowed by the initial fake spectacle. It was a political necessity, she suggested, in a time of desperate Cold War posturing. But the cost to collective trust is immeasurable. A year later, controversies raged on. New historians wrote The Selene Deception, exploring how the faked footage overshadowed a partial genuine mission. Hollywood churned out docudramas. Some revered the fallen archivist Nolan Price as a modern champion of truth. Conspiracy watchers called him the man who dethroned the biggest lie in human history. Meanwhile, certain scientists lamented that the overshadowing confusion might hamper genuine space exploration dreams. If the world concluded it was all illusions, interest in real missions might fade. In the dusty corners of a thrift store in rural Florida, a battered film can labelled Selene C Launch Rehearsal 5 sat unnoticed among old VHS tapes, possibly a leftover reel not confiscated by watchers. A curious shopper glimpsed it, recognised the NASA imprint, and thought it might be valuable. They purchased it for $1. The can sat in a living room shelf. If they ever played it, they'd see a single take that never made it into the final broadcast. An astronaut stumbling under bright stage lights, removing his helmet mid-moonwalk, complaining about the heat. The can's label was faint. For final illusions, keep locked. Another piece of the puzzle, lost to time, or maybe waiting for the next curious soul. As for Nolan, rumours swirled that he might have survived. A fisherman off the Gulf Coast claimed to have given a ride to a quiet man with old film spools in his bag. A small-time blogger said she received an unsigned letter thanking her for defending the truth, but no one truly knew. If he lived, it would be as an eternal wanderer, overshadowed by the legacy that Project Selene was no longer hush-hush. Illusions can define an era, forging national unity or stoking pride. But illusions, once unmasked, can unravel decades of trust, leaving a battered society to pick up the pieces. In the hush of each new night, we might look at the moon, that pale disk in the sky, wondering if humans truly touched its surface as claimed, or if the cosmic stage was an elaborate reflection of ambition and fear. The search for the unvarnished truth, ironically, stands as a testament to the restless curiosity within all who gaze upward. In the end, Project Selene remains the darkest footnote in the history of human aspiration, a conspiratorial reminder that ambition without honesty can produce a triumph with no foundation. And in that final hush, the taped voice from an old NASA spool might echo, "We told them it was a great leap for mankind. In truth, it was a single step into the shadows." Over the next half hour, we'll introduce you to Agent Silas Rourke, Doctor, Liana Suresh, and Director Vance Halcor. A trio drawn into a web of secrets around a lethal pathogen called VX-73. As tensions mount and paranoia spreads, you'll witness how fear can become a powerful tool of control, and how a single whistleblower might spark either liberation or a deeper descent into conspiracy. Now close your eyes, or let them wander across these words, and follow me into the first moments of this dark, suspenseful odyssey. It started with a single headline: Mysterious respiratory illness detected in Port Maxwell. Within days, similar stories crept across the country, quiet at first, overshadowed by routine politics and everyday noise. Then, all at once, everything changed. The virus, designated VX-73, emerged as a swift-moving spectre, triggering coughing fits that escalated into respiratory failure for many. In a matter of weeks, schools were shut, businesses locked their doors, and entire metropolitan areas were quarantined under what officials described as temporary emergency protocols. For Agent Silas Rourke, a 42-year-old operative at the Bureau of Federal Integrity, BFI, life became an endless string of directives and dispatches. His daily uniform was a crisp suit layered beneath a bulletproof vest and a standard-issue respirator mask that itched at his face. He'd spent over a decade tackling threats deemed subversive to national security, from financial sabotage to espionage. Yet no training had ever prepared him for watching entire city blocks fall silent overnight. He walked the corridors of the BFY with practiced composure, scanning the myriad bulletins pinned on corkboards. The walls hummed with fluorescent lights that gave everything a stark, sterile glow. Digital screens listed the latest infection rates, projected mortalities, and newly declared red zones where infections raged unabated. Over the PA system, a recorded female voice repeated the same instructions every half hour. Stay indoors, maintain social distancing. All citizens must comply with the National Stabilization Bureau's guidelines. The National Stabilization Bureau, NSB, led by Director Vance Halcor, had been formed to centralise the government's emergency functions. Some called it necessary response. Others whispered about the creation of an all-powerful agency with little oversight. Halcor himself was a tall, imposing figure who frequently appeared on screens throughout the BFI complex, delivering updates about mandatory daily biometric scans and the development of a new vaccine, Unity Serum. Silas had known Halcor only in passing, enough to catch glimpses of a man driven by unwavering conviction. He recognised in Halcor that sense of unstoppable momentum, as though the security of the entire nation hinged on following his blueprint. Silas tried to set aside his personal misgivings. He was a loyal agent, bound to uphold the Bureau's mission. If the vaccine provided the solution to stop VX-73, so be it. Then one morning, Silas was summoned to a high-clearance briefing. He expected a new assignment along the lines of standard public compliance checks. Instead, he found himself in a cramped conference room, facing a handful of BFI higher-ups who spoke in hushed, clipped tones. The gist was simple. Alleged disinformation campaigns were circulating, claiming that VX-73 was not naturally occurring but lab-engineered. These rumours, the brass said, were fueling panic, turning citizens against the government's measures. Silas's job was to investigate any potential insiders leaking such nonsense. At first, he believed the directive to be legitimate. Disinformation in a crisis could be lethal, prompting civil unrest and undermining official responses. Yet as Silas pored over digital logs and tapped into encrypted chat rooms, he stumbled across an unencrypted file labelled simply Project Paragon, Preliminary. The file wasn't supposed to be on the BFI's server at all. It appeared as though someone with high-level credentials had hidden it behind labyrinthine subdirectories. Intrigued, Silas pried open the document. Inside were sanitised references to VX 73 months prior to the earliest official detection date. The language read, "Field tests planned in controlled sectors. Monitor subject compliance and social response." A chill rippled through Silas. The deeper he delved, the more he found that pointed to a private biotech lab with direct ties to the Department of Defense. Another set of documents discussed funding from major corporate donors, massive pharmaceutical conglomerates that had a vested interest in vaccines, testing kits, and biometric devices. Confusion turned to a subtle dread. If these partial records were real, then the official narrative was incomplete at best, or outright deceptive at worst. Silas secured the files on a flash drive. Over the next few days, he quietly cross-referenced the data, trying to confirm whether Project Paragon existed. He took caution, covering his digital tracks with proxy servers. Even so, he noticed the BFI's internal security channels seemed abuzz with mentions of an internal breach. Fear knotted in his stomach. Someone else was on this trail too. He found short references to a doctor, Liana Suresh, apparently a virologist who once worked at a biotech facility codenamed Cerulean Labs. Her name popped up in correlation with antigen research and compliance metrics. The wording was bizarre. Since when did a vaccine program revolve around compliance? Yet there it was. VX73 antigen trials show 62% compliance rate. Additional modifications required. The date? Nearly a year before the current outbreak. By the time Silas realised how incriminating his findings were, the hair on his arm stood on end. His imagination conjured scenarios he'd previously deemed paranoid. A virus unleashed intentionally. A vaccine designed not just to inoculate, but to control. He forced himself to remain calm. Conjecture was easy. Proof was everything. So he resolved to gather more. That night he left the BFI building with the flash drive tucked in the lining of his jacket. He tried to banish the creeping sense that eyes were trailing him. Outside, the city's main avenues lay deserted. Army trucks patrolled at intervals. Overhead drones whirred, scanning for curfew violators. Digital billboards displayed a single message across a black background. Unity Serum, your key to tomorrow. From a payphone booth, one of the last still standing, Silas called in a favour from a fellow agent he trusted. Someone adept at hacking behind the Bureau's firewall. The friend agreed to help, no questions asked, but Silas could sense tension in his voice. Everyone was on edge, unsure who was truly friend or foe. Silence had become a survival tactic. As he hung up the phone, the city's gloom pressed close, neon lights flickering across shuttered storefronts. In that moment, he wondered if the official explanation, VX73 as a random mutation, was a purposeful lie from the start. If so, then the so-called Unity Serum might be more than just a vaccine. A wave of dread consumed him. The next steps would determine whether he stayed a loyal operative or became a traitor to the system he'd served for half his life. At the next corner, a spotlight from a drone settled on him, scanning his face. He forced a neutral expression. The device beeped and swiveled away. Good. No red flag. Yet. As Silas ducked into the underground metro, he realised with grim certainty that he had stumbled onto something monstrous. For years he'd believed in the Bureau's cause, trusting that each operation served the greater good. Now he faced the possibility that the greatest threat wasn't the virus itself, but the hidden intent behind it. City by city, the VX73 infection soared. Once bustling centres of commerce turned into ghost towns, patrolled by uniformed enforcers under orders from the National Stabilization Bureau. Curfews became absolute. Violators risked detention at newly established health containment camps. The mainstream media hammered a constant drumbeat of fear. The virus was unstoppable unless every citizen complied. For those still resistant, a single solution was presented day and night: Unity Serum. On every channel, Director Vance Halcor appeared in a crisp suit, arms folded behind his back, proclaiming the vaccine's near-miraculous efficacy. Over 90% effective, his report said. a shining beacon of hope. Yet the rollout came with conditions. For public safety, those who refused the jab lost access to banks, public transportation, and official documentation. Within a month, entire swathes of the unvaccinated population found themselves in a twilight zone, forced to scavenge or rely on black market services just to survive. Amid the chaos, Agent Silas Rourke continued his secret investigation. By day, he donned his BFI credentials, working on official compliance enforcement tasks. By night, he devoured every new sliver of intel he could glean from that hush-hush file, Project Paragon. The deeper he went, the more horrifying the puzzle became. Encrypted references hinted at something hidden within the vaccine, a nano-emitter that lodged in the brain's limbic system. One internal document read, "Neurological regulation markers confirm mild sedation of aggression, increased docility, potential for broader cognitive modulation pending further trials." Silas felt physically ill reading these words. Could the government have hijacked a public health crisis to deploy a mind-altering device at scale? He needed answers. Over a secure channel, he messaged the elusive doctor, Liana Suresh, the scientist named in the files. She responded in short, coded texts, reluctant to trust him. Finally, after days of careful back and forth, she agreed to meet at an abandoned warehouse near the old docks. Silas arrived half an hour early, scanning the shadows for signs of a tail. No drones overhead, no suspicious vehicles. He waited under a flickering street lamp, the smell of salt water and rust filling the air. When Liana Suresh emerged, she wore a hooded jacket, her face partly obscured by a mask. Only her eyes were visible, tired, guarded, yet undeniably brilliant. She gave Silas a once-over, keeping a hand near her coat pocket. Possibly she carried a stun gun or pepper spray. Without greeting, she said in a hushed tone, "Why should I believe you're not with them?" Silas replied with the only currency that mattered, truth. He produced the flash drive and recited data from the files, his voice laced with quiet desperation. Liana's expression shifted from suspicion to grim acknowledgement. "I was part of the early design team for VX-73, she confessed. They told me it was to protect against a future pandemic, some advanced deterrent that would strengthen national security. We manipulated certain genetic markers to ensure the virus targeted specific alveolar receptors, but none of us realized the real plan, to unleash it upon the public." Her words ignited a spark of horror within Silas. He asked about the vaccine's rumoured mind control aspect. Liana hesitated, inhaling a shaky breath. "It's not mind control, at least not in the sense of puppet strings. It's, well, it lowers inhibitions, fosters compliance, makes people more susceptible to suggestions. Over time, it can dull critical thinking. They want a populace too numb to resist." Tremors ran through Silas. Even with his suspicions, hearing it plainly stated felt like a blow to the gut. They spoke in hushed tones for another hour, Liana finally handing him a battered thumb drive containing her original notes, the unredacted version that proved VX-73's artificial origin and the presence of a compliance mechanism in the vaccine. "If they find you with this, you won't get a trial. They'll vanish you," she warned. From the surrounding gloom, a rat scurried across the broken concrete. Silas realized how precarious everything was, the squeaking rodent in the dark, the quiet lapping of the tide behind them, his own racing heartbeat. Danger lurked behind every shadow. Sensing they could stay no longer, the pair parted ways, promising to regroup soon. Back at the BFI, Silas carefully compartmentalized his roles: obedient agent in the daylight, clandestine researcher after hours. Meanwhile, the nation's capital sank deeper into fear-driven militarization. Propaganda played ceaselessly on loudspeakers. Stay safe, stay indoors, trust the cure. Curfew drones soared over empty streets, shining bright beams to catch anyone outside after sundown. Social media platforms became inundated with pro-government messages, while dissenting posts vanished, labelled as threatening misinformation. Those who complied enjoyed a semblance of normalcy. Restaurants reopened for vaccinated patrons, businesses resumed for employees who presented a scannable immunity pass. Yet they all seemed more subdued, less likely to ask questions about privacy intrusions or the ever-increasing powers of the NSB. It was as though a hush had fallen over society, as if curiosity had been collectively tranquilized. Within government circles, Director Vance Halcor emerged as a national hero. Public polls, at least those broadcast on official channels, showed near universal support for his bold measures. He'd saved millions of lives, the anchors repeated. He'd stabilised the economy. He was proof that unwavering resolve could defeat chaos. Not a single mention of the billions in profits the corporate donors raked in, nor a hint about hidden modifications to the Unity Serum. As the days passed, Silas found it harder to hide the turmoil in his gaze. He saw colleagues in the hallway, wearing forced smiles, praising Halcor's leadership. He noticed how many had begun to project a certain eerie calm, like their personal anxieties had evaporated. Could it be the effect of the serum? Silas tested a co-worker with a subtle question. Ever wonder why the lockdown measures ramped up so fast before the outbreak peaked? The man's eyes glazed momentarily, then he simply shrugged. Doesn't matter, O'Rourke, they keep us safe. He returned to his desk, more convinced than ever that Halcor's master plan was in full swing. The virus was the perfect storm to usher in sweeping surveillance and push a mind-numbing serum to the masses. And the BFI was part of it, or at least complicit in bearing the truth. He could keep quiet, or he could do the unthinkable and blow this wide open, risking everything in the process. One evening, Silas found a sealed envelope slipped beneath his apartment door. Inside, a single typed line. This is bigger than you think. They see all. The bottom edge was marked with an obscure symbol, a circle with a diagonal slash, like a stylized zero. He'd seen it once in a classified file referencing an underground resistance network. If these rebels wanted to contact him, it meant they believed he might be an ally. The tension hammered in his chest. He was dancing on a razor's edge, his loyalty to the Bureau, his conscience the unfolding nightmare. Taking a shaky breath, he powered up his laptop. A series of pings indicated a new assignment in his BFI inbox. Track down a subversive known for smuggling contraband medical supplies. Silas realised with a jolt that the suspect's name had been flagged in Dr. Liana Suresh's notes. Another piece connecting the puzzle, and another reason the Bureau might soon brand him a traitor. He closed the laptop. Outside, the city lights glowed, reflecting off dark clouds pregnant with the threat of a new storm. If he hesitated much longer, it might be too late for everyone. The seeds of control had already sprouted, and every day they dug deeper roots into the world. Agent Silas Rourke watched from a distance as the unvaccinated families huddled together in the crumbling outskirts of Old Glendale. The press had labelled it a containment zone, but locals called it a human dumping ground. Living conditions were dire, sporadic power, limited sanitation, and roving squads of Unity enforcers scanning for anyone who might have hidden child or avoided mandatory updates on vaccination status. The air crackled with dread. Days earlier, Silas had steeled himself to reach out to the symbol-bearing group implied by that cryptic envelope. If they were an underground resistance, maybe they could help him get the truth out. He had no illusions about personal safety. Once he exposed the deception behind VX-73 and Unity Serum, the entire apparatus of the National Stabilization Bureau would come crashing down on him. But each time he pictured the slumped figures in these zones, cast aside for refusing a forced injection, his resolve hardened. Through a secure channel, he arranged a meeting with a contact who went by the codename Sparrow. The location, an old print shop with boarded-up windows, rumoured to have once published subversive newspapers. Silas made sure to lose any trailing drones or BFI watchers by weaving through side streets. He wore a hooded coat, his respirator mask pulled high to conceal half his face. Inside the print shop, the musty smell of ink and paper still lingered. Boxes of unused flyers leaned against dusty presses. A dim light revealed a short figure in a makeshift black scarf. Sparrow. Their voice was muffled but direct. "You're late." Silas exhaled, nerves crackling. "I had to shake a drone." Sparrow nodded, then led him to a small back room. It was here Silas found half a dozen other figures, all clad in dark, worn clothes. A battered laptop sat on a folding table. A tangle of cables connected it to a generator. One by one, they introduced themselves with code names: Rook, Nightshade, Sahara, a clandestine cell of journalists, medics, and rogue programmers dedicated to fighting the government's stranglehold. "I have proof," Silas said, placing Dr. Liana Suresh's files on the table. "The virus was engineered, and the vaccine is rigged to manipulate behaviour." Silence fell over the group. The gravity of his statement hung in the stale air. Finally Sparrow spoke. "We've suspected as much. Over the past month we've been collecting testimonies, people complaining of unusual mental fog, the inability to feel strong emotions after receiving the serum. We even have ex-military sources who claim the NSB is funneling billions into a new wave of surveillance tech, but we needed a smoking gun. This might be it." Each set of eyes fixated on Silas. He handed them a flash drive, explaining how it contained Liana's unaltered research logs plus the Project Paragon blueprint. The group quickly scanned the data, verifying its authenticity. The sense of tension and excitement in the room was palpable. "We'll need to broadcast this globally," said Rook, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses. "Not just post it. They have near total control over social media and mainstream outlets. We have to do something big, something they can't shut down in seconds." Nightshade tapped a map pinned to the wall, indicating a location in the Sierra Mountains. "This is an old radio tower with shortwave capabilities. We can piggyback on a communication satellite if we rig the hardware just right. It's off-grid, but the area's crawling with patrols. If we can get there, we can push the entire data set to thousands of independent radio operators around the globe. Within minutes, it'll be mirrored 100-fold. Sparrow turned to Silas. "We'll need you, your credentials, your knowledge of infiltration routes. We can't pull this off alone. Are you in?" Silas hesitated only a moment, the weight of countless nights of doubt pressing him forward. "Yes," he breathed, "I'm in." They set the plan in motion. Step 1. Connect with Dr. Liana Suresh. She alone could validate the data on air, lending credibility to the leak. Step 2. Slip past the increased security net. The BFI had ramped up its internal manhunt for domestic threats, with Silas among the top suspects. Step 3. Drive cross-country using an underground route, flipping vehicles and forging new IDs along the way. Step 4. Ascend to the tower, circumvent security drones, and broadcast the files before the NSB realised what was happening. It sounded near impossible. Then again, they had no alternative. If they failed, the public might never learn the truth. The entire world could sink deeper into a docile acceptance of government decrees, enslaved by illusions of safety. Before dawn the following day, Silas discreetly left the BFI headquarters for the last time. He burned the few personal belongings that might link him to known associates. He carried only a go-bag stuffed with his essentials, a sidearm, extra ammunition, false IDs, basic medical supplies, and a small encrypted drive. Meeting Sparrow's team in a secluded alley, they set off in a nondescript cargo van toward Dr. Liana Suresh's hidden location. When they found her, she was in a state of near panic. One of her old lab colleagues had just been found dead, officially from VX-73 complications, though Liana suspected a targeted assassination. She greeted Silas with trembling relief, and after a brief rundown of the plan, she agreed to come. The group moved swiftly, forging through back roads, switching to new vehicles at safe houses. They travelled by night, resting in abandoned barns or shuttered motels. Each day brought fresh headlines about subversive infiltration, plastering Silas's BFI photo on every digital screen with the label "Wanted for Treason." One by one, the safe houses fell under assault. Word reached them that many in the resistance network were disappearing. The official story had exposure incidents, but they knew the truth. The government was eliminating anyone who dared challenge the status quo. Then tragedy struck within Silas's own group. On a rainy evening, they were ambushed by a special ops squad while crossing through a ravine. 3 of their companions, Sahara, Nightshade and Rook, were gunned down amid the blackened mud and pouring rain. Silas, Sparrow and Liana barely escaped with their lives, forced to leave everything behind. The heartbreak of losing them nearly paralysed the survivors, but there was no time to grieve. The mission had to continue. Battered and exhausted, the trio found refuge in a remote cabin belonging to an off-grid doctor sympathetic to the cause. They tended each other's wounds and mourned in sombre silence. Liana said in a trembling voice, "They died believing in something real. We can't let their sacrifice be in vain." Outside, the wind howled across the dark pines, as though the forest itself lamented the world's descent into madness. Silas stared at the flickering lantern light on the cabin wall, a single question echoing through his mind. Was it even possible to succeed against such overwhelming power? Only one path remained: press forward or let tyranny reign unchallenged. When dawn came, grey and cold, Silas Rourke, Liana Suresh and Sparrow prepared for their final push. They had enough fuel and supplies to make it to the Sierra Mountains, the site of the old radio tower. The plan was desperate: break into the facility, override the station's analog systems, and beam the unredacted Project Paragon files across multiple frequencies. If they managed even a few minutes of broadcast, it could be enough to spark a chain reaction of revelations around the globe. But the National Stabilization Bureau and the BFI were done playing cat and mouse. The day Silas had fled, Dirasin Director Vance Halcor had activated something called the Silence Protocol, a draconian directive that authorized lethal force against any suspected misinformation agents. The official pretext: they threatened public safety and national security. That morning, the NSB seized control of the entire state media apparatus. They declared a level 3 lockdown in all areas believed to harbour conspirators. Through a stolen feed, Silas watched Halcor's latest broadcast. The director stood at a podium flanked by stern-faced officers. "We are at war against a virus, both biological and ideological," he intoned. "We cannot allow a small band of anarchists to undermine our unified response. The new protocol is for the safety of us all." In the background, the NSB insignia shone ominously, a stylized eagle clutching a syringe in one talon and a shield in the other. Undeterred, Silas, Liana and Sparrow set out. They avoided main roads, weaving through Forest Service trails and dilapidated back routes. Sometimes they passed small clusters of houses with boarded windows, the silent inhabitants too frightened to emerge. Overhead, the skies held the threat of storm clouds, as though nature itself braced for a final confrontation. Midway through their journey, they encountered an unmanned checkpoint with an automated turret. The device scanned for vehicle transponders that matched authorized vaccine IDs. Of course, their stolen car carried no such ID. The turret activated. Bullets shattered the windshield, forcing them to abandon the car. They scrambled for cover in the nearby woods. Although Sparrow took a grazing shot to the shoulder, they managed to disable the turret by hacking its circuit box from behind. Out of breath, pulse hammering, they continued on foot, forging a path through the thickening forest. By dusk, they reached the slopes leading to the old radio tower. The structure loomed on a ridge above the tree line, its silhouette like a jagged sentinel against the darkening sky. Silas knew from stolen schematics that the tower's broadcasting equipment still functioned, albeit on emergency power. The next challenge: the cluster of heavily armed drones swirling overhead. Huddled behind a large boulder, 3 conspirators surveyed the scene. The tower stood behind a chain-link fence lined with razor wire. A single guard post at the main gate bristled with sensors. Several black SUVs were parked by the facility's entrance. This was no ghost station. The BFI or NSB had anticipated their move. Lights glowed ominously in the windows. They'd walked into a trap. Sparrow's face, partially shadowed by a hood, was stoic. "We can't just walk away now. We'll never get another chance." Liana, her trembling hands betraying her fear, nodded. "I can handle the tower's interior systems. If you can keep them off my back, I'll get the broadcast live." Silas clenched his jaw. He could feel the weight of the fallen friends who had fought and died for this. "Let's do it," he said, chambering a round in his sidearm. They timed their approach to slip between drones, scaling a rocky outcrop behind the fence. Once in position, Sparrow used wire cutters to snip through the chain link. The alarm was immediate, a shrill fiend ripping through the air. Flashlights bobbed in the darkness, voices shouting. They sprinted for the tower's rear entrance. Gunfire echoed as the guard station unleashed a volley. Their hearts thundered. Slivers of bullet impact sparked off the metal scaffolding. Silas returned fire, not aiming to kill, but to suppress. A guard collapsed with a cry, while others dove behind cover. Liana, adrenaline coursing through her veins, ducked beneath a half-raised security shutter and slipped into the tower's main corridor. Inside, ancient wiring snaked along walls plastered with peeling paint. Flickering emergency lights revealed a central control room. Liana lunged at the control panel, typing frantically to override passcodes. She plugged in the flash drive, eyes scanning lines of code. Sparrow hovered by the doorway, pistol drawn, scanning for pursuers. Suddenly, a staccato burst of gunfire rattled the hall. Sparrow fired back, giving Silas time to slam a door shut and wedge a broken chair beneath the handle. Sweat poured down his temples. "Hurry, Liana," he gasped, holding his side from a grazing bullet wound. Her fingers danced across the console. "I'm uploading now, transferring everything to the shortwave frequency. We're pushing it to ham operators worldwide. They'll replicate it across data networks we can't even track." A swirl of static hissed from overhead speakers, punctuated by electric pops. Then it happened. A thunderous blow tore the door off its hinges. BFI soldiers in dark tactical gear poured into the control room. Sparrow fired once, twice, but was tackled to the ground. The muzzle flash illuminated Director Halcor himself, stepping through the smoke, flanked by heavily armed agents. His cold, piercing gaze found Silas, as if marking a final betrayal. Liana managed to press one last keystroke. "Transmission at 90%!" she shouted, triumphant desperation in her voice, but in a flash a bullet ripped through her chest. She staggered, gasping, blood staining her clothes. Silas, consumed by fury, raised his weapon. Before he could steer, a bullet tore into his shoulder, spinning him to the floor. Blood roaring in his ears, he saw Halcor approach. "You should have stayed loyal, Rourke," the director said softly, pistol aimed. "Look at the chaos you've caused. All for what? Lies. You think you're saving them from fear, but fear is what binds society together. Without it, we have anarchy." Across the console, a blinking message glowed. Transmission completed. Silas let out a ragged breath. It was done. The world would see. He glimpsed Liana's form crumpled on the floor, eyes fluttering closed. Soldiers pinned him down, muzzle pressed against his head. Darkness danced at the edges of his vision, cold seeping through every nerve. Yet he clung to a single thought. At least the truth was out there now. Whether or not it would matter, no one could say, but for a moment he felt a faint glimmer of hope, overshadowed by the sting of betrayal and the stench of blood. Then came the shot, and everything went black. Morning broke over a city in turmoil. Media outlets across the globe received a sudden influx of bizarre files labelled Project Paragon. Blueprints, memos, emails exposing the orchestrated nature of the VX-73 outbreak and the manipulative design of Unity Serum. For a few breathless hours, independent stations and citizen journalists shared the trove, appalled at the revelations. Social media feeds erupted with shock, anger, and confusion, but the official response was swift and merciless. Government spokespeople denounced the leaked materials as AI-generated misinformation designed to sabotage public health efforts. Fact-checkers from major media networks, many owned by the same corporations complicit in the scheme, released scathing articles questioning the authenticity of the files. The NSB dismissed the entire broadcast as a last-ditch effort by domestic terrorists, claiming the real objective was to discredit life-saving measures and sow chaos. Director Vance Halcor made another nationwide address, insisting that the virus was real, which it was in a way, and that the vaccine remained humanity's only hope. He claimed that unscrupulous actors, like Silas Rorke, had exploited the crisis to promote anti-government hysteria. Screens across the nation showed Silas's face next to the words, "He lied to protect you." The tagline implied that Rorke's so-called evidence was not only fraudulent, but a dangerous attempt to undermine everything the people had sacrificed for. Within hours, mainstream platforms scrubbed all references to Project Paragon. Accounts that posted the files were suspended or banned. The media repeated a unified refrain. The single source of truth is the NSB. Large swathes of the public, already terrified and half sedated by the vaccine's compliance mechanism, swallowed the official line. Protests flared in a few cities, but they were quickly quelled by an emboldened security apparatus. Drones circled overhead, delivering gas canisters that dispersed any crowds. Some corners of the internet, especially fringe communities in the dark web, continued dissecting the files, finding them alarmingly consistent with known events. A handful of renegade journalists tried to publish stories or host live streams with doctors who'd seen the side effects firsthand, but each digital channel soon vanished, labelled a threat to national stability or hammered by bot armies that drowned the truth in spurious disclaimers. Meanwhile, in the hush of a suburban neighbourhood, a woman wearing a black armband stepped out of a government vehicle to deliver condolences to Silas's next of kin. The official story: he had died in a terrorist shootout while attempting to sabotage vital infrastructure. No mention of the bullet that ended him with Director Halcor standing overhead, or of the battered body of Dr. Liana Suresh found nearby. The Bureau of Federal Integrity updated its internal logs, listing Silas Rorke as deceased, traitor to the state. And that was that. The world churned on, battered by more virus mutations. The vaccine was rebranded with updates, Unity Serum Plus, promising an even safer tomorrow. New mandates required that all children receive the serum upon turning 5 years old. Biometric scanners became ubiquitous. One needed only a palm scan or retina check to buy groceries, open bank accounts, or pass through transit gates. Privacy, it seemed, was a distant memory from a more innocent age. Yet pockets of doubt refused to be extinguished. Whispers spread in the hush of hidden gatherings, in hushed basement chats or encrypted group threads. Some had witnessed the brutal arrests of those who dared question the system. Others recalled loved ones who changed after taking the serum, becoming pliant, losing the spark of curiosity. They recounted flickering glimpses of the Project Paragon files before everything was shut down. The question lingered: had Silas Rorke and Dr. Liana Suresh exposed the greatest deception in modern history, only to be discredited by a well-oiled propaganda machine? In a small classroom on the outskirts of a major city, a teacher stood before rows of young students, all wearing mandated masks. Posters on the walls depicted a bright, sanitized-toned future, each featuring the NSB emblem and the phrase, "Order through unity, safety through silence." The teacher's gentle monotone instructed the children on the virtues of cooperation and the dangers of subversive thought. She tapped a touchscreen that displayed short videos praising Director Halcor's heroism against the dreaded VX-73. At the back of the classroom, a quiet child named Elias fiddled with the corner of his desk, glancing away from the screen. His gaze settled on a faded poster peeling off the far wall, an old public safety bulletin featuring Silas Rorke. The words "he lied to protect you" were stenciled across the man's stern face. For reasons Elias couldn't articulate, he felt a pang of curiosity. Who was Silas Rourke, really? Why did the man's eyes in the poster look so determined, even beneath the scrawled condemnation? The teacher never mentioned him except to parrot the official line, "He sowed confusion, he endangered our unity." Yet Elias felt an inexplicable sense that there was more to the story. The child blinked, shifting in his seat as the teacher droned on about national heroes. Outside the window, the sun shone on a row of silent drones passing overhead. The hush of compliance blanketed the world, broken only by faint echoes of those who once cried out for truth. Did Silas Rourke really lie, or was he telling a truth too dangerous to be heard? At recess, while the other children lined up for their biometric scanning, Elias lingered by a worn patch of grass, letting the sun warm his face. The wind whispered across the playground, carrying with it the ghost of a question. He closed his eyes, imagining for a moment a different world, one shaped by the knowledge rather than fear, connection rather than silence. The fleeting vision vanished as a safety officer called his name, scanning a code on his wristband. Then the moment was gone. Far away, in a government archive warehouse, the battered remains of Silas Rourke's personal effects lay sealed in a box. Among them, an encrypted data drive that no official had bothered to open. It held echoes of a man's last stand, his unwavering conviction that the public deserved to know the truth behind VX-73 and Unity Serum. And maybe somewhere, somehow, those echoes might still resonate in the hearts of the few brave souls who refused to let doubt die. Years later, in the quiet gloom of a shuttered radio station deep in the mountains, a teenage boy stumbled upon a dusty crate marked with faded letters. SR. Inside, he found an old laptop and a series of scribbled notes. When he booted the machine, surprisingly still functional thanks to an ancient generator, a final video file blinked onto the screen. Silas Rourke appeared, face drawn, eyes resolute. His recorded voice spoke like a message in a bottle from a lost era. "I'm not sure if you'll ever see this, but if you do, then you know the official story about VX-73 and Unity Serum was a lie. We tried to warn the world about the real agenda, not just to cure a pandemic, but to tighten a grip on every aspect of human life. And if you found this, you might be willing to stand up where we fell." Static crackled across the screen. Silas continued, quieter now. "You were never supposed to know, but now that you do, what will you choose?" The video ended abruptly, leaving the boy staring at the final frozen frame of Silas's determined face. Outside, the drone of wind echoed along the ridge. Clutching the notes, the teen took a trembling breath, feeling the weight of a legacy that demanded courage. He glanced at the peeling label on the crate. Project Paragon Files. A spark of possibility flickered in his eyes, hope that maybe, just maybe, truth could yet break through the silence. And so another story began.